Jeremy Wiggins has 12 years of experience working with GLBTI communities throughout Victoria and Australia. Works as a contractor for Headspace, providing gender diversity training to secondary students and teachers, a youth worker and currently a member of the aforementioned GLBTI Ministerial Advisory Committee for Health and Wellbeing, and wishes he had times to join more groups, but last year became a father of twins and will soon go bald as a result. Don't tear your hair out, Jez. Come up and present, and everyone please welcome Jeremy Wiggins.
Thank you, Sally. First order of business would be to let everyone know that tomorrow is Sally's birthday. Or is it today?
No, well, it's technically actually next week.
Oh, is it the 13th?
16th, yeah, but that's alright.
I've known you for 13
all
years.
different.
I know it's around the time of my birthday, which is
Yeah.
on Saturday. So.
That's right, balance difference both.
That was really about me, wasn't it, in the end? I'm working on that. That's a personal development issue. Jeremy Wiggins is my name, and thanks for the introduction. We'll get started. But first, did that work? That works. How powerful was the panel of young people? I think that was incredible, and I just want to pay respect to the courage and bravery that they displayed in sharing their experiences. I think there's a lot of information and lived experience in that we can all gain as workers in our field to try and improve the service that we offer and make the changes. And there were a few things that were discussed there that I really picked up on and connected with as a trans person myself. One was growing up in Frankston, which is where I work with Peninsula Pride and Headspace, who are here today. Hello. And also being in a football stadium, because footballers and Frankston makes it really hard for a young gender questioning person, I'll tell you that. But another was also the passing. I mean, I'm going to touch on this a little bit later anyway, but the passing thing I think is like more of a symptom of the larger beauty industry that we all are subjected to, as trying to almost, there's a level of pressure to always be the perfect person and most beautiful and meet the stereotypes that exist in the larger realm of mainstream society. And unfortunately that is narrowed down to an extra pressure on gender diverse and trans people and possibly intersex people as well. I can't speak for intersex. And a note on that is Morgan Carpenter is going to speak a little later on the introduction and overview of intersex. So I'm just going to cover trans and gender diversity. And I'm going to learn how to use this. Alright, so firstly I want to pay respects to the traditional custodians and owners of the land, and I acknowledge that in the room there are also people from Tiwi Islands and Indigenous communities who I very much love working with and have known for a few years. This presentation will probably run for about 30 minutes, 40 minutes. Some of that will hopefully be really helpful, some of that might be me gas bagging a bit. As I said, Morgan Carpenter is going to cover intersex, and for those who have arrived after Sally discussed about the venue, there's toilets through there, and if everyone could please check their phones, make sure that they're on silent. So, first I'm going to give you basically an overview. I need to make sure that I'm not leaving anyone behind in this room. There's obviously a lot of people here that have a lot of lived experience, have a lot of knowledge, and that's fantastic, and perhaps we can all work together and chip in where I've maybe missed something, or I've perhaps not phrased something that might reflect a more broader definition of inclusivity. But we have to make sure, well, I need to make sure that I kickstart the forum in bringing everyone else up to speed on accessible knowledge, so that we can all be at the same platform when we get more in depth into a lot of the other research and evidence and frameworks that other presenters will be speaking about. So we'll start with sex and gender, which is really the basics of why we're all here today. And this conference, or this forum, is actually really groundbreaking. There hasn't been many conferences like this at all in Australia. Last year there was a Cairns Sister Girl Transgender and Gender Diverse conference. which Evie Ryder, who works at the Queensland Association of Healthy Communities, was an MC, did Sally's job there, and I'm going to steal a joke that she did at the start of the MCing, which kind of encapsulates sex and gender. So gender is how I feel and how I see myself, and sexuality, which is not sex, but sexuality is me flirting with you. So she broke that to a room full of like staunch psychiatrists and psychologists. It was a great icebreaker, really. So basically, sex is assigned at birth and is based on unambiguous genitalia. So that's really at the moment where the law and the documentation and the construction around someone's, I guess, identity is based on their genitalia at birth. And that's what goes on the birth certificate, and that is what kickstarts gender roles and the expectations that we have on what someone would be in a very binary system in society. Gender reflects a person's identity, so that's more about how someone would feel about themselves, and that is sometimes in line with sex assigned at birth, and sometimes it is not. Gender expression is how a person presents themselves. So again, this links in with passing and issues there. So it can be a signifier for people to recognise maybe what someone's gender identity is, but it can also not be, because just because someone is, say, a trans man or trans masculine doesn't necessarily mean they're going to look like Bruce Willis, or that they might look like someone else. They might have different kinds of hair or wear different kinds of clothes, and be completely happy with that, and it doesn't mean that they're any less legitimate than someone who would pass. And I say that. I wish we could try and change the language, but that's what we're going to do. I almost said this weekend. Why do I feel like this weekend? Gender expression, yeah, as I said, is how someone presents themselves, and sexuality, again, is not so much flirting, but it's more a person's romantic or sexual attractions towards others. And we can't conflate all of these together. It's kind of a pick and mix. It's not one size fits all. There's no cookie cutter. We have to sort of break the molds of the militant sort of style of everyone must be the same in a carbon copy. And also it can change, and it's very fluid, and that's okay. It's sort of commonly used, the asterisk, because it doesn't want to leave out that there are other identities and other people who may fall within that spectrum or outside of it. So trans means an individual whose gender identity does not match their sex assigned at birth. Now, trans is an umbrella term. It can include a number of identities, but really, at the end of the day, in terms of outside of the medical institution, it can be self-identified or not self-identified. So people can include themselves in that or exclude themselves. I mean, not all trans people, by the medical definition, would actually identify as trans. But terms that we are familiar with, terms such as transgender, transsexual, MTF, which would be male to female, FTM, which would be a female to male, transgender or transsexual person. And sometimes genderqueer people feel like they also identify under the trans umbrella, but not as well. I know it's maybe a bit hard to get our heads around, but I'll go on into that a bit more. But trans itself, I guess, as all language is created, it all becomes a bit of a construct through conversation. And we live in Australia, which is fairly a westernised country, but within our country, there's other identities and other experiences which don't really align with, I guess, the trans identity, and there's other language that's used and other experiences around relating to that identity. For example, Indigenous identities, and some people will be able to speak about that. You know, sister girls may not necessarily use the T in the GLBTI spectrum, and people from core backgrounds as well, especially people who come from other countries where gender is much more fluid and there are other recognised sexes, we have to keep in mind that when we're working in, I guess, a holistic framework and inclusive practice, that we're not sort of trying to always put the westernized binary system of sex and gender onto people and be aware of that. Alright. This is a really dry part, sorry. So the psychiatric lens, and the reason why I'm putting it like that is because currently the way, I guess, being transgender or having, that sort of identity is still very much pathologized in the medical system, in the psychiatric model. And I just think it's important to note that and to be talking about that, and to be talking about where we would like it to move towards and move away from. And is it always necessary to frame things in a psychiatric framework? And how did it get there and where is it going? So, under the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, being transgender is classified as a mental illness, which I think is correct. If someone wants to jump in, feel free to. But basically this is labelled as gender dysphoria. Now, just to recap, it's 2013, but 30 years ago, homosexuality was also included in the DSM. So, if you were, same-sex attracted or gay or lesbian, homosexual, whatever spectrum, that was considered a mental illness as well. So, just in terms of where we're at, we've got to push that envelope further, I think, because we don't have a mental illness. We're not. It's too pathologized. So this process inevitably controls access to puberty blockers, it controls access to hormone treatment, and it controls access to surgeries as well. I didn't get a glass of water. Can someone? Thanks. Otherwise my voice will just crack. So, as I was saying, it's a bit of a gatekeeping process, and I guess it's going to change from person to person, from state to state. It's going to change depending on the GP that you first meet, the level of knowledge, how comfortable they are in dealing with it, how much out of their comfort zone and I guess education level in terms of the area. Do they want to deal with it? Do they have a genuine care working with these people, or do they want to pass on to someone else? And these are the actual experiences of people. And depending sometimes on someone's age or how they present, how much social capital they may have, how much family support, how they're able to express themselves, how they're able to clearly identify and advocate for themselves, can really persuade how the medical institution responds to a person, particularly with young people. So it's not really an equitable process for people. Thank you. If you're lacking in certain areas, if there's any deficit there at all, it's probably going to be a harder time for a young person. And that's something that is not very good. So also, excuse me, as I said, not all trans and gender diverse people have needed a psychiatric evaluation. So it's very arbitrary. It can really depend on a number of matters. And which sort of begs the question, why is there this system if the system is not adhered to in the first place? What controls this? Who is controlling it? And what can we do to build the capacity of other mainstream service providers to, I guess, spread the level of knowledge and to create better access for young people outside of an urban area, in regional and rural areas, and that's why I guess we're all here today as well, to create those pathways. So this process can often also reinforce a gender binary, and it lacks therapeutic or holistic care. And that's also something I really heard from the people speaking on that panel. And from my own personal experience, I know that when I was shopping around as a user, paying for a service, I really wanted a good bedside manner. I wanted my hand held. I wanted to be reassured. I wanted people to really care and look me in the eye and to know their stuff. And And I think when anyone is shopping for any service, you really kind of want the best, and we all deserve the best. So, kind of the gender binary personally, I guess, works for me because I identify, I guess, as male. But for a lot of people, it doesn't. And the system itself kind of tries to funnel everyone down that path. So if you were to be queer identified, or a gay trans man, or a lesbian trans woman, or any pick and mix section of the possibilities, there would be some difficulty in navigating your way through that process, because you would feel an immense amount of pressure and gatekeeping to move forward. So that's another thing to keep in mind. And I'm sure throughout the next couple of days there'll be a lot more information on all this and some solutions and some questions. I don't have all the answers. I think together we can try and work on that. So the reason why I framed the last thing as the psychiatric lens is because it kind of really doesn't capture the broader sense and the broader communities and the broader picture of identities and the landscape of identities, which I think gender diversity sort of captures a little better. Within the diversity of the population exists a multidimensional gender continuum. Whoa, I know it sounds like a spaceship, but maybe Richard Branson could get on board as a sponsor. So it's like a Venn diagram of sorts, but like three-dimensional and overlapping, and maybe there's like sexuality and gender, and all these other sort of nuances around what makes up a human being and how they relate and how they feel. It can kind of shift and overlap. It's sort of always moving. And reaching that point and having that balanced well with language and definitions is kind of a really impossible task, because once you try to define something, naturally you're actually going to be excluding someone, because that's the problem with language. But gender diversity kind of captures a broader landscape of that. So gender diversity is a term which broadly recognises that many people's preferences and self-expression fall outside commonly understood gender norms. And it's the gender norms that I think the psychiatric model is trying to reinforce. Our gender roles, the way we behave. I know before I had to start treatment, when I was a young person, because I would have been 24, 25, I did my research, because the hardest part for me was not going, it was getting to the point of actually picking up the phone and making that first appointment. I think that actually took me months to do that, probably years. But, and I also travelled the world to learn about the experiences of others before coming back and starting that process, because it feels very anonymous and safe in that way. You can do it without judgment. You can do it without your peers looking over you, tapping you on the shoulder, or your family, butting into what your business is, because it's a very personal and private sort of experience at times. So, that was a tangent. So basically, in terms of accessing the services, unfortunately the psychiatric model doesn't allow for that gender diversity or that sexual diversity. So in this gender diversity spectrum, there is less pressure to conform, to medically transition, and there is space allowed for moving along and back and forth. So we don't need to feel like someone has to convince us that they're really dead set certain that that's their identity and they better commit to it for life. Because, it's just too hard for us to have to, get used to it again, or if you change your mind. And this is the sort of thing these are the sort of discussions that happen in my workplace when I first came out. And so, as workers, this is the sort of culture we have to kind of try and create in our own workplaces, and in the way that we deal with young people, and in all the conversations we have outside of those contexts to try and create that greater social change. So gender diversity are terms that are sometimes adopted in this area, and there's so many more, but I've just picked a few here. Gender queer, gender neutral, and gender non-conforming. This year has been a really good year, I think. Sally and Transgender Victoria and Brenda and everybody else in the room, National Health Alliance. It's been a fantastic year, and I'd like to congratulate everyone for the massive changes that have happened at a legislation level. Gender identity has already been protected in terms of human rights at state level in Victoria with the Victorian Equal Opportunity Act. So it's illegal to discriminate against someone based on their gender identity. On a federal level this year, the Sex Discrimination Act it was an amendment that was introduced, which instills further protections for a range of people. And that quote there, gender identity means the gender-related identity, appearance or mannerisms or other gender-related characteristics of a person. This includes the way people express or present their gender and recognises that a person's gender identity may be an identity other than male or female. So that's by the Australian Human Rights Commission. So we are moving. We're moving along, and there's been some great work in that area. Still got some way to go, but I think it's good to acknowledge that it's good, you know. Yeah, I think that was So population size, whenever I go to the next slide, I know it's not perfect, and know it opens a huge can of worms, and this, you know, but I think I've got to give a little snapshot here. The population size for all ages in Victoria, this is from the Zoe Bell Gender Centre fact sheet, which also cites research from other organisations and other individuals. Just quickly, we can see that there's several definitions, because it's very hard to capture the population and the data of the population, because you can't really fix someone's identity and then count that. I mean, there's so many diversities there. So the narrow definition, which is people who transition legally and medically, is approximately 1 in 11,100 trans women and 1 in 30,400 trans men. I think those statistics are actually higher, personally, but again, the data collection can never be perfect. Broader definitions, so that means people who are seeking treatment for gender dysphoria but who may not medically transition. Those stats appear to be a lot larger, and that would be true. I think there have been probably more people that don't necessarily want to medically transition or have any surgeries or go on hormones, who perhaps would identify as genderqueer or non-op or no hormones and a whole range of things. And I guess the broadest definition in terms of the gender diversity landscape, people who may not identify as transgender or any of those terms, I guess the population gets larger and larger. So in terms of Victoria, that's a recent snapshot, and I'm sure there'll be some people talking later today about why there are some issues with data collection, which is something that we can all work towards in our workplaces to start to change the way we collect data and try to reflect a better representation of the true population and communities and our needs. Currently, excuse me. So, young people are classified, I guess, as 12 to 25, but in terms of this forum, because we are talking about access, sometimes, you know, we're talking about access to hormones, and that really generally refers to being of legal age to consent. So, child and adolescent would be under 18 years old, and a young adult 18 years and over. So treatment services and models of care are notably different depending on the age of the person, and the pathways there are different, so we sort of need to know about that. There was a recent landmark case which set a precedent for requiring the court's approval for children under 18 to start hormone therapy. I think there's a precedent, but I don't know entirely if it's completely changed, but I know that previously, if you were a young person, or a child, sorry, under 18, and you wanted to start to, you know, make the changes to affirm and actualise who you really were, and go through the process of seeing a GP, etc., the family would still have to go to family court to have a judge sign off on that, to approve that. So really what we're trying to go, but I think the model that we're sort of trying to move towards is self-determination, a right to make decisions over our own bodies and what happens to that, and informed consent, so being able to be a part of the process of acquiring the knowledge and the know-how and understanding of what is going to happen to people and their bodies and their physiology, and being able to say, yes, that's for me, without jumping through all of these unnecessary hoops. And in terms of accessing going to a court, family court, I mean, first of all, you have to get over the first barrier, which would be financial access to that process. That's going to rule out most people, I think. You know, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars, upwards of $40,000 plus. So the average family, even if they have the gumption and the love and the kindness to be able to get behind their child and say, we know this is important, we love you, because we've seen those stories recently on SBS and other TV shows. If they don't have the money, how do they even get there? So that's also an excellent thing that happened this year. Sally covered this really well, so I'll just skip over this really quickly. Inclusive language is something that we can adopt in conversation and through respectfully when talking to people, but it's something that we can reflect in policy, in statements, in our organisations, in our emails, everything. So pronouns, I probably should have said at the start, I prefer him and he, and there's a range of others, you know, her, she, them, they. Excuse me, Sally mentioned Z. So them, they, Z, and a range of others would reflect someone that doesn't identify as either male or female or in the gender binary. I mean, they may sometimes identify as also both and still prefer gender-neutral pronoun. Some people might like to have them both used and interchanged. And really, we can't all expect to know that. It's okay that you can't know that, but you can find out ways to know, to respectfully cue by politely asking, I'm not sure, is there a pronoun you would prefer? Is it okay that I've asked that? It's okay if you don't want to answer that. You can also avoid using a pronoun if you're sensing that it's so difficult to bring up with a young person who's feeling very anxious and hasn't got the language themselves. You can just avoid using a pronoun and try and use their name. That's also possible to do that. And you can assist others around you who you may have picked up on the fact that someone has misgendered someone. So misgendered would be to use the wrong pronoun. If you're picking up on that, but you know bringing direct attention to it in front of a young person is going to cause an immense amount of stress and anxiety, rather than just bring it out in the open, you can just overuse the correct pronoun and make an emphasis on that. So there's ways that we can sensitively do this without causing unnecessary stress to a young person. So some of the key protective factors, which we all love to talk about. Support from the family, I think, is actually the first thing, because this is where people start to experience feelings of being gender diverse or having any gender identity issues of some sort. And families obviously come in all shapes and sizes. There's no cookie cutter for that situation as well. I know I was the eldest of 3 girls, so I was always forging away from my parents and witnessing the shock on their face whenever I landed the latest bombshell, which I did at age 8 over dinner. Which is a funny story. I mean, I'll tell it. Well, I've already started. So, I think it might have been lamb chops that night. Neighbours might have been on down in Frankston. My family moved back from Papua New Guinea, and there used to be a drive-in in Frankston, and they must have bulldozed that and popped up a tiny A.B. Jennings estate. We moved into one of those houses, and I said, "Oh, I'm a boy." Mum's like, no you're not. No, you're not. I am. Like, no, really, I am a boy. No, you're not. You are not a boy, you are a girl. I said, well, I will be when I get a sex change. Jaw dropping, other conversations over the next few days. Stop that fire, oh my god, it's a bushfire, it's out of control. So these things fluctuate throughout life. When you try and adjust, society tries to, funnel you that way or turn you in that direction, and you forget about it for a while. It was too hard to think about for that long, so you get by. And I think I grew up with a very supportive family. They've been great. Later on, I came out at 15 and it's like what I thought was gay, because I had no idea about transitioning when I grew up in the 90s. There was no one on TV, there was nothing. I had no idea. So I thought I was gay. And again, I told my mum, crying, I think I'm gay, like this, waiting for the catastrophe zone to hit. The anxiety's built up. You work on this stuff for months, and then it's like, oh, I don't care about that. Let's go get McDonald's, And I'm like, wait, can we please address the seriousness of this? It's like, but it just shows that my family were very supportive, and they've continued to support me. Some other amazing quotes from my mum, which I can talk to people about later. I won't fill up the whole stage. But I'm just trying to emphasise that support from the family is kind of going to start the process of better health and well-being for a young person. But keeping in mind that families need support through that process as well. I was always very aware on a holistic level that even though this journey for me was really intense, it was equally intense for other people around me who loved me and wanted to make sure that I was okay and happy. And that's really, I think, at the end of the day, that most good people want for each other. So, for example, Peninsula Pride down at Headspace Frankston offer that support to families, Pride in Our Families, and I'm sure there's other services here who also reach out and provide extra support for families. Another key protective factor, engagement with school and education. We need to keep people in school. We need to keep them engaged in our school community. We need to make sure those school environments and school communities are safe. Schools Coalition Victoria do that. And because keeping people engaged in education is going to, obviously we all know, keep them healthier for long term throughout the rest of their life. Social engagement and support is another key protective factor. Creating support groups and environments where people can share their experiences with other like-minded people who have gone through similar things. That is actually, I think, the most powerful thing in the world. That is how our community, I think, survives largely to an extent. And sometimes I sit back and I'm just looking at the information exchange, information network of our community and how we share. I think it's one of the most amazing things I've ever witnessed. So hats off there. But yeah, social engagement and support is extremely important. And I think this needs to happen with a whole of community approach. We need to get all community groups and members, from the family to the school to the youth workers to the mental health clinicians to everybody in this room, to, I guess, stepping forward and building a strong foundation of support for a vulnerable young person. And I say vulnerable only because that's the system now. I don't think young people would be as vulnerable if we were 20 years down the track and had made some really excellent advances in this area. Using terms like vulnerable, sometimes I hate, because I like to focus more on the strengths of young people. And someone said to me at a party once when I was younger, and this person was older, they said, I think young people are far more cockier and self-assured than older people. And I didn't get it. I thought, what do you mean? I don't feel like that. But as I'm getting older, I realise there's such truth in how someone feels when they're a young person. And it really, I think, is something to value. And I think as you get older, because of all of the external influences, it can create that doubt. And that's often what happens. I think Cameron was talking about that on the panel. So that's just something to keep in mind. And that's me. I don't know how much time I filled, probably enough. But does anyone want to ask any questions? maybe I can talk about who I am. I didn't even say who I am. Yeah, go, Gabby. I was just going to say what I do. Yeah, I'm Jeremy. I'm a youth worker. I'm just about finished at Victoria University. I thought that when I started transitioning that I could be real total stealth and just get on with life, but I love the community and I don't want to leave it. And I don't think it's any solution or the right sort of attitude to assume that life just immediately gets perfect once someone passes. There's still a range of medical issues and social issues that we all experience even once you reach that perhaps ideal point that you thought you would. So that's why I'm still involved in what I'm doing. And it's kind of, in a way, good that I'm out because I keep bumping into people and my life keeps coming like this. Like I study with Tracy's daughter from GASP and I meet other people at workshops. I can't actually hide it. So that's the amazing part of that. So I'm a youth worker. I study at Victoria University and I've been working in this area for a while. There's a lot more that I do, but that's irrelevant. What are we going to ask?
So, you had mentioned that we sort of construct vulnerability. That's not inherent to young people that they are vulnerable. It's not a property of the person, but it's rather this construction that we have, similar to how when we use the gender dysphoria model, my background's in field of psychology, when we use the gender dysphoria model that's in the DSM, as you mentioned, we require people to have a severe level of distress before they get that diagnosis, and therefore, in that sort of gatekeeping model you mentioned, you have to be manufactured distress or be promoted to distress by making it that you can't get what you need until you feel distress. So it's force you to have distress. I'm sort of wondering, because I too share that sort of critique of that model, and I'm sort of wondering if you have some thoughts on, I know this whole issue dance is almost trying to create an alternative to that nationally as well as locally. I'm wondering if you have some thoughts on how we can manufacture things like actualization, strengths, feeling really supported, feeling excited about people's genders, or as somebody said earlier today, gender fabulous. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a good point. So I think we do share some views on that. I always felt as a young person that I was really resilient and courageous and full of passion in life and always very assured of who I was. And I think maybe other people might feel that way at times, and it was only when these external forces start to, I guess, dangle these these carrots in front of you to start to doubt yourself. And it's interesting how human nature, in a sense, has this ability to self-destruct in a way. I think how we can approach that and respond to young people in that way through celebrating the affirmation of, I guess, someone's self-identity or is to create more empowering and positive environments and celebrating that people have experienced any form of growth and that it doesn't need to be a permanent fixed solution and that they don't need to sign a guarantee that that's who they will be, that there is no pressure around it and that they'll be accepted as who they are and loved for who they are. So I guess that's looking more, I know the human rights model, it looks at people being a recipient to rights that are given to them in a way, but there's other approaches like the strength-based model where it more sort of sets up a system or an environment or a culture where we're sort of more so encouraging people and advocating for them to achieve their own rights and their own identities and supporting them that way rather than handing them what we think is the way to be or what they are entitled to or what they deserve. And I think it's that power imbalance and that power structure which can create that distress and that anxiety. And I think that young people also, especially today, network really well over social media and exchange information that, is just very profound and kind and open. And if they get a sense that they need to say something to get what they want, they're going to say that. And what I think about the current system is that's a missed opportunity in an exchange between someone who has some really good skills to offer someone, is to have to make them, I guess, almost present as a character of some kind. You're missing out on that holistic approach to any kind of therapy, any kind of advocacy for what they need, identifying a range of other issues beyond what their gender or sexuality might be. So I think somehow, hopefully, over the next couple of days, we will address some of these ways we can improve that.
I'm just sitting here thinking about that medical thing as in gender binary requirement in the terms of the anxiety needing to be and to identify as one way or the other, and yet we've got forms now where, like your passports and that, where you can have no sex declared or X or whatever you like. Do you think as more organisations, government bodies, what have you, offer that third gender, if you like, or the option to not specify or decide for yourself, that will impact the medical profession to also open their minds to that concept?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's going to inform that is going to be the groundswell of social change, which happens throughout our organisations and throughout our communities. Morgan will probably touch a bit on the Passport X, I'm assuming, I don't know. But I think that it will inform the medical system, I hope. I think that we have to keep in mind that services sometimes still operate as a business model as well, and there is an exchange of money. People are paying for this. And so sometimes certain organisations or coalitions or boards of governance or what have you want to maintain their market and their niche market, which is probably quite profitable right now with the increase of trans and gender diverse people. So that's something to keep in mind as well. That was really probably controversial. But no one has told me to shut up yet. So.
This time?
Alright. Thanks for your questions. Thank you. Thanks, Alex.